what's happening in the US is that Asian people are getting attacked. I mean, killed in some cases. There's a lot of racism towards Asian people, and the people who are committing these acts of racism come from all races, or all of the races that are predominant in the US. So there's a lot of black people in the US. I think they make up like 14-15%. There's a lot of white people. There's a lot of Hispanic people in the US. All of them, or some individuals from all of these groups are being racist towards Asians. So if a white person hates an Asian person because they're Asian, is that racist? Just yes or no?
Yes.
Okay, if a Hispanic person hates an Asian because they're Asian, is that racist?
This is what I said. This is why I said no, is because no. Listen, it's not because we're not getting anywhere. It's because this is why I brought up the
Hey there, everybody. This is a fan with too much time, and here I am again with another political video. You guys already know, if you've been with me long enough, that I don't really like to make these. They're not what the channel is for. It's just that as a part of a man's responsibility, he must use what he has to, do what is right. You've probably heard that spiel, so I won't give that spiel more than I have to. Today, however, we're not here to address anything like Donald Trump and his horrendous cult of personality, which continues to grow. It's a very, very troubling phenomenon, and I can only hope that it will continue to unite moderates, liberals, and everybody else who doesn't feel like literally bowing down and kissing the cock of some crazy orange TV show star who suddenly got very popular. I hope it continues to unite people, and they don't forget that cults of personality from little men who are not very smart are very common in history and are one of the chief ways by which we descend out of our greatness. But that aside, because that's not what we're here to talk about. Today, I fulfill a different kind of responsibility. I wish that I didn't have to make videos on Donald Trump because I wish that conservatives would make them. I can have a good-natured disagreement with a conservative based on conservative ideals, but it's extremely disheartening for me to see things like at CPAC, where Donald Trump suddenly wins by 70% in a simulated vote. Where is the sense in that? It falls to us within our individual quote-unquote groups and party affiliations to put out our voices to stop madness from reigning as the single assumed opinion of what is being proposed. And no one is immune from this. Not the left, not the right. So I'm going to do this today because it needs to be done. Right now, there is a rather large debate across the country as to whether or not CRT, critical race theory, should be taught within our schools. Obviously, and full disclosure, I consider myself a classical liberal. And I do also consider myself a progressive. So I went into this with a bias, hoping to find that CRT is a worthwhile endeavor, that it should be taught in schools. For one thing, it would have meant that I don't have to make a video. I can just let this play out and continue doing what I'm doing and not be bothered by it. But another thing is, when you see other liberals promoting something and you're a liberal, just like when you see other conservatives promoting something and you're a conservative, you want to believe that they're right, because it would mean that you're also right without having to differentiate yourself. This is not quite what I found in my investigation here. So, without any further ado or preamble, let me just dive into my notes here and bring forth my issues with critical race theory and my opinion about it, and my thoughts. And I do this half as a way of, voicing a contrary opinion that isn't getting a lot of coverage, because I feel like I can't be the only classical liberal or progressive who sees the problems that I'm about to illustrate here. I say that, but I also say this in order to be corrected. If I am mistaken here, if I'm under a misunderstanding, I am very open to being corrected, and I want to know the truth. Though I'll try to address that again near the end of the video, because while it is possible that I may be mistaken, it shouldn't be the case, because I have done research for this video, and, you know, I'm kind of a nerd, so research is a pretty easy thing for me to do. But without any further ado, let me just tell you about the things that I found an issue with. You see, proponents of CRT, that is to say critical race theory, and its component racial equity exist. They claim that it exists to promote and define an awareness of racial history, the nature of systemic racism, and the role that things like systemic racism play in our modern lives. On the face of it, this is not a bad thing at all, and not something that I would ever oppose. You know, racism has greatly shaped our world. I feel like even the staunchest Confederate conservative, if you gave him truth serum, would certainly, you know, admit out loud that there has definitely been an enormous impact in history due to racism, racial bias, racial discrimination, racial division, things of that nature. I don't think that that's up for debate. Racism has greatly shaped many parts, potentially even the majority of our modern world, and has defined many histories and major historical events. Not that everything is predicated on racism, but it's hard for racism not to touch everything when it has been as ubiquitous as it has been throughout our human history. I believe these things should be examined. They need to be discussed and potentially acted upon. I mean, obviously, we cannot do things like go back in time to prevent the deaths of innocent Americans at the hands of bad police officers, you know, bad faith police, of which there are many, and their existence is enabled by existing policy. But we definitely should recognize that these kinds of police exist, that they're allowed to exist, that they inflict their harm disproportionately upon the African American communities in this country. And we should take profound and powerful action to prevent it from happening again, along with other such tragedies and examples of abuse of power, whether that be like an oversight organization that exists in addition to the police, or some modification to the police, or even to take funds away from the police that were given for the purposes of helping the police deal with mentally disabled people they may encounter, and creating a new division of enforcement that handles specifically situations called in, you know, by people who are disabled, or people who are referring to people who are disabled and know this is the case. Things like this to help reduce these instances of injustice. I do believe this is the case. I think that those things need to be examined. They're everywhere, not just in police accountability issues. Additionally, I feel very strongly that so far as just what should be taught in schools, that we definitely should not ignore racial events in our history. Absolutely not. And I don't mean that in a general sense either. I mean that in a specific sense. Things like Juneteenth, you know, children should know about that as they grow up. There's a lot that shouldn't be thrown under the rug, if you will. Just because we might be past it doesn't mean that we'll stay past it if we don't remember it. You know, forgive but never forget. And I really do mean that. It's important that we not forget the things that we did wrong if we don't want to keep doing them wrong, because one day all of us will be dead, and the only things we leave behind are the legacies of what we taught and impressed onto the future. So, removed from, for just a moment, critical race theory, my opinion on racial history is that it should be taught and that people should be educated on the things that have happened. I don't necessarily believe that should take the form of like a discriminatory form of teaching where white students are meant to feel guilty towards what occurred in what is essentially their own racial heritage, you know. We try not to persecute people over their racial heritage because it doesn't represent who they are as a person. And this principle, though a little not applied in the exact same way, is definitely the same principle that applies here. It's, you know, absolutely vital that we not inspire sourness, that we not plant seeds that will turn sour. We not make people feel unfair emotions and give fertile soil to the racists of the future who will look for any emotional cause to hook into. While they are responsible for all the events that occur in the future, I don't really believe in the sins of the father philosophy, where the son inherits the sins of the father. What is the justice in that? I don't see it. You know, the son may inherit the world of the father, but he shouldn't inherit his sins right off the bat. So that's basically my thought on that particular issue. You know, try not to instill guilt or retaliation into what is effectively supposed to be the learning that will help create a better generation. You know, while it's important that be said, it's also equally important to say that we not forget the mistakes of our past, and the biggest mistake that this country has ever made is the full-throated endorsement of chattel slavery that we had during the rising of the nation. And when I say full-throated, I don't mean that everybody was 100% for it, but I mean that by and large, by policy, the entire country employed it to a degree and benefited from it. That is a great evil. That is probably the greatest evil ever perpetrated by this nation. And while it hurts and smarts, it needs to not be ignored precisely for that reason. And that is my opinion on that, removed from critical race theory, because I'm about to talk about some things that are really critical about critical race theory. And it's important that you understand and not conflate my opinion about one piece of it with my opinion of another piece of it. That being said, so that's not my main issue. You know, what CRT proposes to do is not my main issue. I need to make that extremely clear, because I don't want that to be conflated. I've seen many people conflate, oh, you disagree with CRT, so you don't believe in systemic racism, or you don't believe in, this or that, or the things that I just mentioned, and that's not the case. And not only is it that I don't not believe in those things, but I also do believe that they need to be addressed and need to be continue to be addressed. Very important that get aired and not conflated. Because my main issue with CRT is not what it claims to want, but rather the actual demands of the theory and ideology. And if you're hearing me and you think, oh, the theory doesn't demand it, well, it does demand something, and I'll explain it. I don't expect you to take my word for it. I'm not a social scientist, and while I am a pretty big nerd, I don't consider myself to be a scholar or an academic. And I can feel that some of you who may be in my audience right now, who are supporters of critical race theory, either in full knowledge of what it is or in partial knowledge of what it is, you may already be discounting my opinion based on the fact that I am essentially a layman, that in these topics I am not an expert. I beg you, please don't do that. The fact that I am a layman, the fact that I am not an expert but rather a more typical example of the kind of person you are trying to convince, should do the opposite. It should have the opposite effect. Please lean in. Please make an effort to break down your bias, for every human has a bias, positive or negative, and listen to me as if I had the right to speak and be understood, because just like you do, so do I. I've had it explained to me also that critical race theory is not meant for the common public, that its terms and definitions are meant only in regards to scholarly circles and debates, such as how there is jargon within professions. A good example would be how in dentistry, calculus is not a term that is applied to math, but calculus is a term that is applied to the hardened residue of plaque after it has been left to sit for too long. So obviously those definitions differ wildly, despite the similarity of their phrasing and the similarity of how it sounds. So the reason I say that is because I can accept that there does exist jargon that needs a very specific context, but this can no longer be the case or used as an excusing logic when debating or talking about critical race theory, because right now the debate is whether or not it should be taught in schools. I will therefore not be able to accept that kind of argument, for we are not speaking of scholarly circles when we are discussing topics of public school education. Therefore, the layman's opinion, that is to say, opinions like mine and people like me, of all skin colors, should be considered carefully, addressed respectfully if possible, and not dismissed, politely or otherwise. With that out of the way, let me sort of dig into this issue a bit more. Because the first big issue that most people will encounter when they begin their investigation of critical race theory is the redefinition of the word racism and racist and how it should be applied. If you Google racism, the definition you'll receive is something like: racism is defined as prejudice, discrimination, or antagonism directed against a person or people on the basis of their membership in a particular racial or ethnic group, typically one that is a minority or marginalized. This has been the standing, understood definition of racism for the past 100 or more years. And so, for a century and more, the term racist has been villainized, weaponized, and deployed against those who would divide the world not by the more, I guess, logically sound bonds of a nation's goals or the barriers of a belief or ideal system, but rather by the arbitrary color of one's skin and of those that came before them, that make up their heritage. And this weaponization against such people is a good thing. It's a very good thing. It is a good thing that we have a word for people who act this way towards other humans with different skin colors and racial heritages. It is a good thing that this word has become so villainized that it can serve as an insult to the innocent and the guilty alike. With this, definition, we accomplished a lot. It's really marvelous in the face of our human history. I mean, for one thing, this word is efficient, flexible, and directed. It aids in identifying maligned individuals and societal structures alike. For their direct, it lets us hold people accountable for their exact and direct beliefs and for what they have done and endorsed. And perhaps most importantly, it places the locus of control within the individual person or organization that has been the target of the accusation of racism. If you are a racist, you don't have to keep being one. It isn't easy, but it is a choice that you get to make, which means it's something in your control and therefore within the purview of your direct responsibility. And that is fantastic. It really is fantastic. It lends all of the framework and basis for the term racism and its accusation towards a person to be a moral judgment, a negative moral judgment. That's good. The term has been so effective at doing what it was intended to do that true blue racists, like people who are honest to God, total racists, who hold really legitimately racist beliefs, rarely admit to being racist at all. Instead of, admitting that, yes, I'm a racist, I believe my race is superior, and blah, 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 racism is right, they will usually, most of the time, not all the time, but most of the time, try to rationalize away their racist belief as something logical and not racist, instead of owning up to being racist. That's so wonderful. That is how effective this term has been at doing precisely what it was set out to do. And And it should be a source of subtle celebration that on an earth where racism has been the norm for literally tens of thousands of years, its power as a virtue has finally been largely broken. You know, obviously racism isn't broken, it's still all over the place, but racists aren't proud to call themselves racist in all but the most ignorant and crazed groups. You know, not but the littlest men will now openly admit to a racial superiority. And even Donald Trump, with all of his virtue signaling toward the racist elements of his base, and he does virtue signal. It's very, very obvious. You can point it out with the left and you can point it out with the right. It's very easy to see. Even he will not openly claim those kinds of things. That's how villainized it has become. And that's a freaking amazing thing. It's not something that we shouldn't appreciate. You know, it didn't come about as a matter of course, or without an enormous amount of effort or an immense amount of sacrifice. That has been part of the success of what racism means in the modern day. And, you know, while it can be easy to take it for granted today, we really should reflect on 40,000 plus years of potential human history that haven't done this as far as we're concerned, at least not to this degree. So, concerning critical race theory, that theory promotes a very different idea about what racism means and how it should be applied to the people around us. In critical race theory, the most commonly described definition of racism goes something along these lines. In order to be defined as a racist, an individual must be within a society that has been subject, or rather, a society that has subjected its population, historically or contemporarily, that is to say in the past or the present, to racism, and that person must be a member of the quote-unquote race that was meant to benefit from that racism. If these conditions are met, then you are a racist, and if they are not met, then regardless of your personal beliefs, actions, or history, you're not a racist. So, as you can plainly see, this definition has a very, very different meaning, nearly entirely divorced from what came before it. What this new definition of racism accomplishes is much less helpful, at least from all I can see, for the causes of fighting true racism around the world than the definition which was in its place before. In this newer definition of racism, individuals who perform racist acts and endorse racist beliefs are less easily identifiable. An example, I guess, would be David Duke. David Duke is a Klansman, and obviously a racist. But according to this definition, so am I too, a racist. And now, I, a man who has put skin in the game against racist causes, am in the same category as a man who has put skin in the game for racist causes. This seems kind of unhelpful, you know, even at this early stage. And then if we do it on the flip side, meanwhile, a person of Asian descent who holds the belief that their race is superior and acts those beliefs out violently, even in the forms of hate crimes, that person cannot be considered a racist. Even if they are working to bring about massive racial injustice within the United States, even if they decry equality open and out to the public, they are not racists under the definitions of critical race theory. They are prejudiced, but under CRT, they cannot be defined as racist because they do not resemble traditionally Caucasian people. And it really is about what you resemble versus what you really are. As so far as what defines you as a racist. Because you see, I do believe that critical race theory has correctly identified that the majority of racial definition and discrimination is cultural. It's incredibly cultural. Races don't really exist, especially not in a world as homogenized as ours. But they're perceived to exist. So how are they perceived to exist? Well, it's based entirely on how you look. So if we have two black parents who have like one white ancestor 8 generations back, and their baby via total genetic lottery comes out white, that baby and then resulting adult afterwards is racist. They're racist because they will receive the benefits of their they'll receive the societal benefits of historical racism and systemic racism, and because of that they're racist. And equally, if two white parents with a black ancestor 8 generations back have a baby that through genetic lottery comes out with a ton more melanin and looks like a black person from 2 black parents in a black family, they will not be racist. Even if their parents are racist, even if they themselves work to benefit racist causes, because they have black skin and enough facial features or any features that cause them to be identified publicly by the society as a black person, they can't be racist under this definition. Now, I see the logic that is involved here, at least to a degree. But we already, traditionally, within the United States and abroad, have a term for this phenomenon of receiving the benefits of historical and systemic racism, as well as the benefits from other things that may not be fair. This term, as you may already know and be anticipating, is called privilege. And privilege is a great term. Privilege is not a moral judgment on someone. It just indicates what they're allowed to do and what they get, regardless of whether they deserve it or not. If you want, CRT could adopt a term like racial privilege to denote a very specific kind of privilege. But in place of doing something like that, CRT really does seek to categorically redefine. And I wish it weren't such a hard point. But if you debate, converse, speak with, or read about proponents of critical race theory, you'll quickly find that they're pretty stalwart on this. They definitely want this, before we can proceed to the rest of the theory, this needs to be accepted. And that's a huge problem because, well, for one thing, again, we already have a term for this that is not so inflammatory and doesn't have all of this history and connotation behind it in the form of privilege. The existence of the term privilege really does beg the question, why do we need to redefine racism to take its place? And what goes in the place of the term racism when we've removed it from where it was? It leaves sort of a gap. I mean, what do I now call David Duke? A prejudicer? That doesn't really... Now I have to adopt a whole new term, and it's not really a term with any powerful history behind it. It weakens the powerful moral impact of what was previously a very, very harsh and powerful and shame-inducing judgment, which helps. People should be ashamed of wrong things that they do. When we call a person a murderer, most people are not proud of being called murderers, and obviously racists don't always rise to anything near that level of atrocity, but they can, and we hold them responsible for those who have. So that doesn't really get done with a term like prejudicer. But I digress. Sorry. This conflation purchases very little for us as liberals in exchange for the definition that is already there classically. But it does go farther than just including real, honest-to-God racists with reasonable Americans who happen to be white. You see, in this new definition, I'm a racist because I have pale skin, I live in the United States. Those two things are what make me racist. Putting aside how weirdly racist it sounds to force me into that kind of category due entirely to my locality and skin color, the issue that this new meaning, the issue that I'm trying to illustrate right now is just that this new meaning, it removes my internal locus of control. I can no longer determine and control my inclusion into this category based on my volition and choices, nor my beliefs or personal history. It in large part removes my ability to personally and directly address the accusation of racism. No amount of education will make me not a racist, nor will any amount of activism, nor any manner of support for egalitarian causes, physical or monetary. According to critical race theory, at least so far as I've been able to understand it up to now, you are either oppressed and therefore unable to be defined as a racist, or you are an oppressor and thus must be racist for being the recipient of of historical racism. It almost seems to mock the very notion of existing inequality, and it does not seem to define what existing inequality would look like, or what you would call that, or what definitions or terms would apply. It almost seems to take on the aspect of a "you're with us or against us" ultimatum, but not as directly, but also without nearly as much voluntary control. I mean, normally when someone comes to you and gives you that kind of ultimatum, they say the whole thing. They don't just say, "You're against us." It's just a really weird, depowering thing that loses us advantage. I don't understand that. It's a worse ultimatum than what is often considered to be the worst ultimatum that an organization can make to people. But again, allow me to digress. Let us do something a little novel. Let us follow as calmly as we can the logical conclusions of this definition should it be adopted. So we adopt CRT's definition of racism. I am a racist under this definition. My skin is pale, and I live in the United States. That makes me a racist. While I can work to overcome existing problems of racism, I can never undo the history nor erase its trail and historical after effects. Our arts, movies, literature, etc. are forever stained by their times, and nothing I can do will ever change that. I can fight all my life for equality, but I'll never not be a racist. So, speaking logically, it must be the case that it is okay to be a racist. If I do not hold racist beliefs, subconsciously or not, and I do not support racist causes, and I actively fight against them, but still fall into the category of racist, then it cannot be a bad thing to be a racist. A racist can be bad, and a racist can be good. Being a racist is no longer a statement of morality or a statement of judgment even. In fact, it really does begin to resemble other arbitrary and involuntary categorizations, such as those based on race and gender themselves, neither of which can be controlled, and neither of which determine your moral worth as a person. In short, it removes the internal locus of control that is present in the original definition, and it replaces it with an external locus of control, which, if you're familiar with psychology, is not conducive to changing a behavior. It's actually heinously disruptive to the attempts to seize control of something you're doing and do something different. So, let's full stop right here, okay? I'm trying the best I can to remain calm, but if you think that Donald Trump gets me pissed off, you have no idea how much worse it is when I see my own side making arguments that are so bad for us. I mean, it's not even just that they're illogical to many extents, but also the fact that should this be adopted and this go into the mainstream and be accepted by everybody, in the best case scenario, it's not a good thing. It cannot become okay to be a racist, and I also refuse to agonize over being a quote-unquote racist if being one is not something within my personal control. I am now, because of what this theory is promoting and trying to teach into schools, and in this theory where we all accept it, I am forced to choose between the horrendous discomfort and dissonance of the old definition, or accept the benignity of the new definition. Being called a racist shouldn't become benign. We liberals don't gain anything from doing anything like that. Like, why on earth would we want to do that? The term racist serves a very good purpose. If we extended the term murderer to mean people who touch other people, as opposed to people who kill other people. Heck, if we extended the term murderer to the to people who wound other people versus kill other people, the term murderer doesn't mean the same thing anymore. If someone stands up and yells, "Murder!" suddenly it doesn't mean, oh yeah, the person they're pointing at has killed another human being. No, what it means is the person they're pointing at has potentially assaulted another human being or has assaulted another human being, and we don't know how bad it is. That is not a good... Why on earth would we choose to have that less precise definition that removes the morality and the judgment out of the term racism? Which, you may not like the fact that terms have judgments applied to them, but they do, and they should. We need these things to define what is right and wrong in human civilization. It's not good to take it away from ourselves for no purpose or benefit. It's not helpful to hurt your allies by adding the contrition of the accusation of racism, and it's not a good thing to alleviate your enemies by making the term racist mean less, or rather be so generally and inclusive that it cannot mean as much as it used to. It becomes imprecise. These things don't help us in a fight, metaphorical or physical, and that is precisely the result of following this redefinition to its natural logical conclusions. As a liberal and a proponent of liberal causes, I just cannot see the merit in doing this. On top of that, those who promote CRT are no more in control of the English language than I am or you are. Nobody has that kind of societal or social authority to just on the dime redefine a word. It's a process. And because of that, people who promote CRT will face resistance even from those who would have agreed with it, just because fundamentally they have failed to smoothly socially replace the definition of the term. This problem will and does and continues to completely distract from anything and everything else that CRT may be trying to say, the value of which will go unweighted, because you're not going to eat through and get to the most delicious ice cream sandwich on the planet if it is sandwiched between two massive dog turds. It becomes a non-starter. That's the definition of a non-starter. And for a lot of people, agreeing that they are racists and that definition is now out of their control is a non-starter. I just don't see why the heck you as a proponent of the rest of the CRT theory would want to endorse this redefinition when it actually prevents your ability to expound upon the worth, or at least potential worth, of your theory. And what's more, I feel like it hardly needs to be said, but it does need to be said, because for some reason people like to act like it isn't the case. This is incredibly, and I mean incredibly, inflammatory. My first emotional response to a person telling me that I'm a racist is to say, "Hey, buddy, go fuck yourself. You cannot judge me based on a generality drawn from others that look like me, and I won't stand in a moral queue with goddamn Hitler just because you think I should." That's my initial emotional reaction to that. And I'm on the side, at least ostensibly, of people who support this theory. I consider myself a progressive. I consider myself a classical liberal. I vote for these causes. I donate to these causes. I march for these causes. I just don't, it's so unhelpful. And the common counter to this last kind of criticism is, "Oh, I don't respect political correctness," or "Facts don't care about your feelings." I used to make fun of conservatives for being fooled into dropping out of civil discussion. At some point along the line, the conservative politicians were able to successfully pitch to their base that political correctness, which it can be gone overboard, but most of the time is not, that political correctness is not required for a civil discussion. What is the point of political correctness? The point of political correctness is to avoid offending people. Why do we want to avoid offending people? Because when you're trying to have a debate, a successful, constructive debate that allows us to decide whether a thing is right or a thing is wrong, and what direction we should go, and where we should compromise, which is not... It's not something that we get to choose not to do. For our government to work, this needs to be the process. Fucking accept that. Everybody accept that, okay? If we're going to do that kind of thing and have compromise and debates that are constructive, it is required that we make attempts on both sides to not be offensive to each other so that we can talk without one side losing too much emotional HP and dropping out of the conversation in outrage. It's not right when Republicans do it. It's not right when Democrats do it. It's not right when conservatives do it. It's not right when liberals do it. It's not helpful. And this is incredibly, incredibly inflammatory. And to say that the inflammatory nature of the statement, of the redefinition, is irrelevant due to how right you think it is, or how facts you think it is, or how little you respect political correctness, is not a helpful attitude to have when your objective is societal change. As a marketer, I can tell you this. If your message is not palatable, then it becomes unacceptable. No matter what it is, good or bad. If Nazis and skinheads and the Trump supporters who have graduated into Trump cultists who literally believe nothing but what the guy says, even when it's an outright bull-faced, pure-ass lie, if they can take the time to make whatever horrendous messages they may be trying to get out palatable to their audience, then maybe, just maybe, you should consider the same tactic. Otherwise, we will all be at a distinct disadvantage, and for nothing, and with nothing to show for it other than what? Pride? Even for those who are legitimately within the right, you know, those who are morally, truly vindicated in the eyes of reality and God, they must abide the rules of this kind of contest. A just and good man loses in a fight if he is not stronger than the opponent he is facing. And CRT actively makes our man, quote-unquote, weaker in this, quote-unquote, fight. It does not make it easier to combat racism or the political opponents who use racist virtue signaling to gather power. You know, in fact, it vindicates them. It really does. It vindicates men like Matt Gaetz and Ted Cruz, two absolutely abhorrent politicians. I have no idea how these guys get elected by their electorates. I mean, especially Ted Cruz. You know, you look at Texas and you think, yeah, Texas, the Lone Star State. You know, Texas, all about individual freedoms. Texas, you know, rough and tumble, even if they're conservative. And then you look at Ted Cruz, you know, a guy who changed his name to be more politically appealing, and that worked in Texas. A guy with a freaking goblin face who literally sucks the toes of a man who disgraced his wife. A man who, when he decided to watch the inside of his home, like he put cameras inside of his home during his presidential run to show how relatable he was, only proved how unrelatable he was. That guy gets voted as Texas's representative in the Senate of our country. It's beyond me. And then you have Matt Gaetz, a guy who is basically all out and out, just obviously a dude who paid for sex with a minor. And it keeps getting more and more clear. And even if that weren't the case, even if we say, oh, that's just somehow a trumped up conspiracy charge or whatever, and that all that shit didn't happen, Matt Gaetz has such a long history of having no integrity, no respect, no, like nothing but slime pours from this guy's mouth. Any time that he says anything legitimate, it's usually by pure fucking coincidence, because Matt Gaetz has no association to reality. And this is not a thing that all conservatives do, but it is a thing that some people do. And by the way, it's not just conservatives who do this, but God, after Donald Trump especially, it's like they've been given carte blanche permission to just make things up on the spot, and no man does it like Matt Gaetz. And yet, they are given needless vindication by us on which to like espouse hateful and misleading platforms. Because when they say this,
critical race theory says every white person is a racist. Critical race theory says America is fundamentally racist and irredeemably racist. Critical race theory seeks to turn us against each other.
They're only barely lying, because this attempt to redefine racism has given them so much pointless fuel. I mean, how much effort must we now spend on making this damage? How much longer will parasites and fakers like Ted Cruz and Matt Gaetz plague us when we give them real causes to gather support behind? We need to be smarter than this. You know? We who support liberal causes need to be better than this. We need to engage those selfish men and women who ride racism into strength and power with tact, intelligence, and a great consideration for what our goals actually are and what will actually accomplish them. And this leads us into my second biggest issue with critical race theory, which admittedly doesn't have very much to do with the theory in and of itself, but rather with the horrid and at times tyrannical displays put on by those who claim to promote it. I'll show you a particularly egregious example just to make the point, but it does not need to rise, and often does not rise to this level, but it doesn't need to rise to this level to become totally unacceptable. So watch.
Pivoting, I do want to take a moment to remark over the disturbing misconduct by this board during the April school board meeting when members of this board staged a prepared personal attack on community member Doug Marshall. During those prepared attacks, board members misrepresented facts around equities in schools, presented unindexed statistics that have no reflection on Pennsbury.
You know what? I'm going to stop you there. We're not going to tolerate misrepresentation of facts around equity. So that's irrelevant, and you can stop.
In your opinion?
No, you can stop, Mr. Daly. You're done.
You sure you want to do that to Mr.
Yes,
Ramirez,
I do.
All right, we'll see you in court, sir. Just a reminder, you didn't need an equity.
I said you're done.
You didn't need an equity.
I said you're done. Mr. Daly, sit down.
At the last meeting, the equity and critical race theory audit was reviewed, and the crux of that was that there were different...
I apologize. It's not what it's called. That is not...
That's how I'm addressing it. And
that's not what it's called.
That's what I'm calling it.
I understand,
then
but that's not what it's
your
called.
comments are irrelevant then if you're not going to call it by the right term.
This
is the equity policy.
Look, some people call
it's the equity policy.
All right. I'm telling you what I think it is, but if you'd like, I'll use your term, although I disagree with it. Fair enough?
Equity policy. Go ahead.
The curriculum that's being used here in Pennsbury, diversity, inclusivity, and equity, and it's known by other phrases nationwide, often cherry picks facts to create what I feel is a predetermined narrative, which again stigmatizes certain groups of people. And yet there are many facts that are not included in the curriculum, which I think just aren't included because they don't fit the official narrative. For example, first-generation Nigerian immigrants excel to the top of the academic socioeconomic ladder of success. Or
all right. We're just you're getting into irrelevant things. We're just going to stop you there. You're done.
Who made you the king of
you're
the
done.
sport?
You're done. You're done. We're not going to take it, that is irrelevant.
That's important because it breaks.
You're done, Mr.
No, I'm not.
Yes,
done.
you are, Mr.
No,
Marshall. You're done. You are done.
I will sue you as well.
You're done.
No, I'm not.
You're done.
What? Based on what?
Board Policy 903. You are now being disruptive and disorderly. You're done.
You're the one.
You're done.
Yeah. You know what?
You're finished.
You can count on being sued. I'm going to sue.
Robert Abrams.
Robert Abrams, Lower Mayfield Township. I want to thank Mr. Daly. While we were sitting here, he got me some numbers. Apparently, what was sent out by the district, 65%, considering the diversity program, 65% are extremely happy now, 27% were neutral, 8% were unhappy. So we're going to build a multi-million-dollar program for the 8% that are unhappy. I'll bring the 8% in here. Let them meet with.
All right. You're done. You're done. We're not going through this again, Mr. Abrams. That is not what the equity program is about. And we're not going to sit here and listen to you. You're done. You're done. You're done.
Honestly, after what you did to the last two, I think you are.
You're done. You've already violated the board policy. According to the policy, your public comment has been terminated.
I feel that I barely need to say anything here. Most reasonable people will clearly see that this kind of demeanor and behavior in the setting of a meeting or discussion is unacceptable. I don't know what precisely this man on the board thinks the point of discourse is, but he greatly aids the narrative of racists in this country and damages our causes when he is seen to behave this way. Perhaps he was correct. Perhaps these speakers got off topic, or said something mistaken, or broke some kind of rule. But what was not correct in any way was his conduct. Men sitting there were not shouting over him. They gave him time to respond to their statements without interrupting him. If they make a mistake, then it is the if somebody makes a mistake in a public discourse, especially one that concerns the future and nature of children and public education, then it is the responsibility of the person representing the challenged ideology or belief to briefly educate them on their mistake, briefly, because they're not going to use their time, so you can use their time to briefly educate them, okay? That should be acceptable. And calmly request that they return to their seats for breaking the rules of the meeting. If they refuse to return to their seats, cut their mic and have them escorted out by the police. Let them make the scene. But do not take moral high ground, real or not, as permission to act like a tyrant or a child, especially if you have the authority in the discourse. If you are a person of authority in the discourse, you are even more than an equal participant obligated to listen, hear out, and act with excessive reasonability and excessive civility. The point of discourse is to give people a recourse outside of violence and rioting. If you take that away, what do you leave behind? Again, things do not need to rise to that unacceptable level to become toxic or detrimental to our cause. Time and time again, I find otherwise reasonable men and women who would be fighting for equality, which is a good fucking thing no matter who the fuck you are, sliding into incivility, rage, and even retaliation. It is hard for me to encapsulate with mere words how harmful this is for us. I am not suggesting that we accommodate racists and bigots beyond what is reasonable in a civil discussion. But I am saying that if a discussion is to be had, even as a debate against racists, fascists, bigots, and anarchists, then we need to commit to remaining civil from our side. We must represent logic, tolerance, understanding, civility, and therefore civilization. If we choose not to, then we gift the opponents of equality and justice boons in exchange for nothing more than personal and selfish self-satisfaction. We do not need to tolerate racist acts or racist policies, but if we are debating a racist, if you are debating a racist, if I am debating a racist, then we must tolerate him and his speech insofar as the debate is concerned. At no point can we allow ourselves to be too incensed to continue. At no point can they be allowed to make a statement that is too sensational to respond to. And I don't mean that we censor them. I mean that we cannot let a sensational comment throw us off our game or get us out of into an emotional downward spiral. At no point can the semblance of censorship be seen to be our weapon. It shouldn't be our weapon. It can't be our weapon. Let me be exceedingly clear. I do believe in systemic racism, and I believe the work to unravel it is far from done. I do believe that we who fight this fight, who demand police be accountable to the public they police, who demand the removal of monuments that were put up to traitors after the Civil War, not celebrating them as Union soldiers, Union commanders, but celebrating them as traitors to this union. They should be torn down. We who insist on the destruction of racism, wherever we find it, we are in the moral right. This is correct. This is what God would want. This is what Jesus would want. It is not good to judge and treat people badly based on nothing more than their skin color or even their culture. And it is not good to glorify men who fought for that right. Yes, it's a right to treat people badly. It's not a right you should have. You don't have that right. I don't have that right. And I'm hardly grandstanding when I say racism is bad. It's not a grandstand. But how much can I say racism is bad if we change the definition to racism to mean something other than what it is? Then I can't even say that any longer. Do you see what I mean by how unhelpful it seems to be? We cannot allow self-righteousness to define our movement. We cannot allow indignation to become the source of our policy. And we must not surrender the tactical advantages that we may possess in the belief that the semblance of a moral high ground will suffice in this fight. It will not, and it never has. Perhaps within all of this, you have found me to be mistaken. Perhaps there is some key element I am yet missing, a fundamental misunderstanding that I am suffering under. If I am, I welcome the correction. But I also insist that if this is the case, that those proponents of CRT who would correct me also take a look at those beside them to see if they are saying the same thing. I have performed research before this video. I have tried to obtain clarity. And if it is the case that I have failed to do so, it is not from want of effort or desire to understand the truth, nor from a lack of bias to see this be the truth. And that becomes a huge problem in and of itself. If this movement or ideology, academic theory rather, is so opaque that even I, with my bias to see it be correct, and with my mind so predisposed to excessive reading and searching, could not parse the quote-unquote lore of this correctly, then you really cannot and should not expect most laymen like me to do so as well. And before we even begin to talk about teaching this within schools to young children, you have a moral responsibility to the parents of those children to instill within them a correct understanding, if not an acceptance, of what this theory proposes to teach. So, until such a time as that is the case, that I am shown to be mistaken and the ideology is explained to me as something more comprehensible and acceptable, my opinion on critical race theory is this. It does not seem to provide anything of value that has not been given to us by existing racial theories and liberal ideologies. In fact, it seems actively detrimental to our causes, so much so that the conspiracy theory side of me has suggested more than once that this is a psyops. But, you know, that would be crazy, right? Right? So, no. I can't and do not support CRT being taught in our schools. And as of now, I don't think that I even believe in or agree with the theory as it is being explained. Though again, I likely have only a tertiary understanding of all of its underlying concepts, and I'm always open to learning more, even about things I don't agree with. I do not believe that these things should be banned, quote-unquote, from being taught or researched, but I do believe that we should broadly agree, generally speaking, on the moral content of what is being taught to our children, and I do not believe that critical race theory deserves any tax dollars in its current existing state. And that is that. You know, and now you have my thoughts on critical race theory and also on a lot of the ways in which a lot of people who are, again, ostensibly on my side of this aisle have been comporting themselves in debates and arguments. And listen, if you're a conservative and you're listening to this as well, you know, you're not off the hook from that either. This is not a thing that is a left or a right issue. Us Americans from the media and from our politicians have been slowly indoctrinated into believing, falsely, that civility is not required in civil discourse. I would rather run the risk of accepting an unreasonable, politically correct term than run the risk of not being able to have the debate at all. Do you see what I mean? I don't think that any of us on any side of the aisle should be so willing to accept that. You know, this war on cultures and this it's not helpful to us. That's not how our society was designed to run. This may be the way that a society can run under a different system, but for us, we actually need to mesh and hash our issues, and we are immunized from being able to do that if we also don't agree to use at least marginally civil discourse. And in so many ways, it doesn't seem conducive to that. I don't like making videos about liberal content, ostensibly liberal content. I keep saying ostensibly because it's just, how can I call this liberal? You know, it's promoted by people who call themselves liberal. That's why I have to call it that. But it's not something that I would consider to be ideologically liberal. You know, I mean, it isn't pro-white supremacy, but that doesn't make it liberal. So, but even though I don't like making content like this, not political videos and not political videos against things that are supposed to be ostensibly on my side of the aisle, I think that I have to make those even more than ones against Donald Trump. I mean, Donald Trump threatened the entire system by which we are even able to have these discourses and tried to have it overthrown. I can't believe that people overlook that so lightly and don't care about that. It's really mind-boggling, you know? And when people criticize Biden for getting the most votes in history, Biden didn't get the most votes in history. Donald Trump got the most anti-votes in history. Like, please understand that. You completely fail to realize why Biden was even capable of winning this election when you refuse to look at the enormous flaws and inflammatory rhetoric of your opponent. This is why, for most part, politicians try to be non-offensive and have only recently been going in the opposite direction. Because you can rally support by being offensive, but you also usually rally an equal, if not greater, amount of, anti-support of antagonism from the public and from people in general if you comport yourself like a total piece of garbage in the way that Donald Trump constantly does. Really, I expect better from American conservatives. It's not about being conservative. Please, Christ. People are like, oh, look at CNN. Look at their numbers falling. Look at their ratings falling. CNN's ratings were never that good. CNN's ratings got good because of Donald Trump. That should mean something to you. You know, in the same way that CRT fuels conservatives to fight against liberal causes because of how unreasonable it is, it's the goddamn same thing with Donald Trump. We both sides need to do better in our own way, but I'll say this. I have a responsibility to do housekeeping on my side. You know, you won't see me decrying a whole lot of Republican stuff just because, I mean, what does my opinion matter? I'm a liberal. Who's going to listen to me? I only even put up to speak when it gets as bad as what had happened with Donald Trump and him not agreeing to a peaceful transition of power. Okay? So, ugh. But this is not much better than that. I guess it's better in that it's not a person. I don't know, man. CRT is toxic and it shouldn't be endorsed. At the current moment, I have no reason to not believe that. As you can hear, this is I don't make these videos professionally. I make these videos out of a powerful emotional need to fulfill my moral responsibility. And at no point can it be assumed that I support things that are toxic like this. So I'll have to speak out against them when they occur. But now that I've got this done and out of the way, I can actually finally put this off my plate, check this off my list, and get back to what's really important. Warhammer versus Star Wars.
Suffer not the unclean to live. Lead us from death to victory, from falsehood to truth. Lead us from despair to hope, from faith to slaughter. Lead us to his strength and an eternity of war. Let his wrath fill our hearts. Death, war, and blood. vengeance, serve the Emperor. In the name of Dawn.
If you've made it this far into the video, I thank you, my friend. I know that it can be a lot to ask for these kinds of intrusions, and honestly, that's why I always say that it's no judgment if you choose to skip them. But for those of you who stick with me through them, you really do get an interior view of the author who puts together the entertainment that both of us really enjoy. I love making it, and I hope you love watching it. Speaking of which, next time I come back, we will be a little earlier than the week-long Rumble. I'm going to give you guys that treat I promised. And in this treat, this new little peek, we'll be going beyond Axum to take a look at what is happening outside of that extensive combat sphere. So, until that time, I'll see you next time.